Okay, it is just past 12 o'clock. So good afternoon to everybody who's here with us to attend session 2 of our 4-part series on California Senate Bill 743 Lessons Learned After July 1st. We had our inaugural session last week that was very highly received. We had well over 150 attendees for that session, excuse me. And today's session is about public agency perspectives. And before we roll into this section, a little bit of housekeeping for those of you who are not with us for the first session. There is a Q&A window option that's available from your menu option on your Zoom screen for you to type up any questions that you have of the panelists, and the moderators will take the question and route them to the panelists during the presentation. And we will go approximately for 1 full hour. There will be approximately at 1 o'clock, I will have a couple of closing slides to present, but then depending on the interest level and the number of questions that may have been left unanswered at 1 p.m. and we may go a few minutes beyond 1 o'clock up until 1:15 p.m. or so if there are questions. But without further ado, I want to introduce today's moderator, Mr. Eric Rohr from VRPA. He's a Director of Traffic Engineering at VRPA. And with that, I will hand it over to Eric to start the today's session on public agency perspectives.
Thank you, Ravi. I'm Eric Rohr from VRPA Technologies, and I'll be the moderator today. My main job is to handle the questions, but I'm just going to have a few brief and introduce the speakers, but I have a few comments right in the beginning. Today we are talking about the public agency perspective. So we have a regional council of governments, a county and a city from Northern California, Central California, and Southern California. So we're about as balanced as you possibly can be. I'm going to say that most people on this call probably know what SB743 is, and you'll certainly learn about it in this webinar, but it is very simply the change from level of service to vehicle miles traveled for California environmental studies. And I am going to let you know the 3 panelists that will be speaking to you, and then I'll go to each one individually. As Robbie said, the best place to put questions is in chat, and then I'll be watching all of the questions, and we'll have a discussion after our 3 presenters. So our 3 presenters are Christine Kai from the Fresno Council of Governments, Cameron Hsu from Sacramento County, and Maureen Gardner from the City of San Diego. So that's my quick introduction. With that, I'll turn it over to Christine Kai to start her presentation.
All right, thank you, Eric. Let me share my screen. All right, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank ITE for giving me this opportunity to speak about our SB743 regional guidelines. Some background. Fresno COG is a 1-county MPO. We are not a CEQA lead agency for any land use or transportation project. That is to say, we don't approve any land use project, nor do we certify any EIRs for any transportation projects. However, we have multiple decades of experience working with DMT through our transportation conformity work and our SB 375 work. And about, I would say, a year or 2 ago, we developed our activity-based model, which is considered a more accurate tool for estimating DMT. In Fresno County, many of our small cities, there are member agencies. They don't really have the resources or technical capability to dive into the VMT world. So back in 2019, our policy board directed us to develop regional guidelines to guide the region in the SB 743 implementation. If endorsed by all the jurisdictions, then the regional guideline will provide regional consistency, and hopefully some strengths in numbers for the recommendation we made in the regional guideline. So what's in the regional guideline? We calculated baseline VMT for each of our 16 member jurisdictions. We recommended a 13% threshold as opposed to the 15% recommended by the state for office and retail, office and residential projects. We also developed technical tools to screen out projects and calculate project VMT. We made recommendation for calculating of induced VMT for transportation projects, and also the guideline included a list of potentially feasible mitigation measures for our region. So in order to help you understand some of the findings that we have throughout the guideline development process, I want to give you some basics of Fresno County. We have about a little over 1 million population in our region, and 65% of the population live in this Fresno-Clovis metropolitan areas. And the rest of the small cities and the communities that are very spread out throughout the entire region. So some of the small cities are isolated, and in terms of travel, they're pretty self-sustained. But some of the smaller cities, they are within easy commute of the metropolitan area, like this group of cities here along 99 corridors. And for the small cities, their population range from 5,000 to about 30,000. So, with that, it's not surprising to see, this VMT baseline map for city of Fresno, where 50% of our population lives. You can see a lot of green, inside the city of Fresno, meaning in the urban core area. As a region, this is the area that SB743 wants the growth to go, because people living in the metro area, they, compared to the rest of the county, they have shorter travel distance. And now let's look at a small city within 30 minutes of commute time of the metropolitan area, Kingsburg. So it's a lot of red. It's because a lot of people in Kingsburg, they commute to the metro area for jobs, for a doctor's appointment, a lot of other destinations. And a lot of jobs in Kingsburg are also held by people living in the metro area. So average commute is longer than the metro area. So in Fresno County, we have many of these kind of small cities. The average commute is longer in the than the regional average. They are going to have a harder time building houses and attract unemployment. So as I mentioned earlier, we recommend a 13% threshold for residential and office project. This was really based on the greenhouse gas reduction target that was given to us by ARB based on 375 work. I think a lot of people know that the statewide target for SB 743 purpose for all the MPOs is about 18%. But ours is 13%. That's our basis for our recommendation. And this is the VMT screening tool we developed. It's web-based, and that includes the half-mile buffer of our high-quality transit corridor. And also this is the VMT map, basically. So project sponsors, they can enter an address or an APN number, and they can find out whether the project can be screened out or not. We also developed a VMT calculation tool that's for office and residential project, and this is for smaller size project. I think the threshold we set for using this tool is, I think it's 500 housing units for residential project and about 375 employees for that, for the development. And this VMT calculation tool is a close approximation of our activity-based model. So, and we also included a couple of TDMs in the VMT calculation tool, only those TDMs that we have local data for. So for projects that's larger than the threshold or other type of projects, we are recommending that the project sponsors contact Fresno Cog modeling staff to run the ABM for their project. And for transportation projects, we follow Caltrans guidance and recommend calculating attributable VMT by running future with project and no project scenarios. However, for local transportation projects that's not on the state highway system, we recommended using ABM plus the land use allocation model to calculate the induced VMT estimation. So we are not recommending using NCST as recommended by Caltrans for the state highway projects. And the guideline also include a list of mitigation measures, that are potentially feasible for Fresno region. Unfortunately, as you may know, a lot of the mitigation measures include a big range of VMT reduction rate. And for our region, we have very limited local data to really pinpoint one specific reduction rate for those measures. So that's what we're, still need to have more work done. We have done the VMT reduction rate calculation for a couple of measures, for example, van pool, carpool, transit projects. These are the areas that we have gotten data from our local rideshare programs, van pool programs, and our transit operators. So. And of course, the lessons that we have learned from the development of our guideline, that's a one-year process. We're at the tail end of it, and we're just about wrapping up with technical documentation. So that we from the baseline VMT, you can tell smaller cities and the rural communities, they're going to suffer, and they are going to. It's going to be much harder for them to build housing and attract employment, and this is largely the area where our environmental justice population and disadvantaged community live. So potentially there's some social equity issue there because of this, difficulty to develop housing and attract more jobs. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't have enough local data to quantify a lot of mitigation measures. So that's something we need to work out over time. And there's belief that regional mitigation programs are more effective than some of the on-site mitigation measures. And that's something that also will take time and resources to be delivered. And last not the least is we have some concerns about the NCST tool that Caltrans recommended to use for state highway projects. I think the tool will have impact on the delivery of highway capacity projects that are not existing local sales measure, and potentially for projects in our next measure. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric for some questions, if there are any questions for me. Eric,
sorry, it took me a minute to get off mute there, but here I am. So we had a couple questions, Christine, and Robbie, I'm assuming it's okay to take questions at this point. Yes. Christine, you talked about the 13%, using a 13% threshold instead of 15%. You talked a little bit about that and why it was done. Is there any more explanation you can provide? And I'm going to add my own flavor to this question. Is could I assume by that if you're at 13% and the statewide is 15%, do you think that means some other region is at 17% and it all balances out, or what can you add to that discussion?
So Our substantial evidence really points to the ARB's board action back in the spring of 2018 when they adopted the GHG target for each of the MPO. And the bigger MPOs, they have more tools and capability to reduce GHG, and which was recognized by the ARB board. And for smaller MPOs, you know, where we have less tools to reduce VMT, and that was also recognized. So we, based on that assumption, you know, we think that those, you know, it is okay to assume that, you know, regions are allowed to have a different level of GHG reduction goals based on our ability to achieve them, which was recognized by the ARB board. So that's our argument for 13%.
Okay. Okay, Christine, a couple more questions. I think we have time for two more quick ones. There's a question about the threshold for commercial retail projects, and the statewide threshold for small projects is just that retail projects do not cause an increase in VMT, but for large projects, do you have, well, first of all, do you follow that statewide threshold that small retail projects don't cause an increase in VMT? And then secondly, do you have a threshold for larger retail projects?
I think, you know, if I remember correctly, for smaller retail project that's local serving, we set 15,000 square feet as the threshold to be screened out. And for the other larger project that's larger than the 50,000, we follow the state guideline looking at whether the project is going to increase the total VMT for the region.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I saw was about the NCST. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is?
The NCST tool is a tool developed by, I believe it's UC Davis, to measure the induced travel for widening project, for capacity increasing project. And Caltrans has decided to endorse that tool and statewide. So mainly that's only for projects on the state highway projects, and Caltrans guidance has been very clear about that. And you know, there's a lot of more detailed guidance on how to use that tool versus the region's travel demand model, whether the travel demand model is sensitive, you know, with the induced travel. I think a lot of concerns about the use of the TDM, the travel demand model for estimating VMT, induced VMT is, you know, our travel demand model was not really developed for the purpose of estimating induced VMT. Therefore, for, you know, some of the capacity increasing project will lead to some, you know, land use changes because of the widening, and therefore more VMT. Those are the induced VMT, and the travel demand model does not really have the capacity to do that kind of estimation. So that was the basis of, I think, you know, the state wanted to use the NCST, but you know, in my opinion, there's a lot of weakness or shortcomings of that NCST tool. It's overgeneralized. It does not have local context, and it does not have any regional differentiation for the elasticity. So that's why we feel like, you know, for our local transportation project, we are going to use our own process, which is a more integrated travel model and a land use allocation tool for estimating the induced VMT.
Okay, thank you. And for the audience, if you have further questions for Christine, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and we'll talk about those towards the end. So once again, thanks, Christine, and we'll go next to Cameron Hsu from Sacramento County. Cameron, we're ready for your presentation as soon as you're ready.
All right, thanks, Eric. So my name is Cameron Hsu, and I'm a senior civil engineer with Sacramento County DOT. So like Fresno, we're a fairly high growth county, and we're projected to outpace California by 19% and the rest of the nation by 43%. The graphic on the right shows incorporated cities which are grayed out and unincorporated counties' numerous growth areas colored in. So comparing that to VMT screening maps developed by our MPO, SACOG, most of these are greenfield with little data available, but would likely be high VMT areas. And this is going to pose a real challenge to a lot of our development. So for over a year, SACOG has hosted a local agency working group to coordinate implementation between the member jurisdictions. The meetings have been led by a consulting team who produced a number of white papers on various technical and policy issues, and many of the recommendations were incorporated into our approach. In developing draft guidelines, we researched and reviewed approaches taken by a number of early adopters, such as the City of San Diego, who will be following me, San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles, Pasadena, and Elk Grove. And there were a lot of great ideas that we borrowed and tailored to our needs. A general plan amendment adopting VMT-based significance thresholds was just approved by our board 2 days ago. So one of the things that has made this process interesting for us is that we chose to maintain level of service policies in the general plan. They're not particularly stringent. We allow LOSE in urban areas and D in rural areas. But because of this, in practice, SB743 has been additional requirements for us, not streamlining. We're trying to be cognizant of the additional burden by tightening up our study areas. So instead of analyzing 10 or 15 intersections in the TIA, maybe we can do a focus analysis on 5. But the process isn't getting easier or cheaper. And there are many who feel that LOS has outlived its usefulness, but we also use our LTA for a variety of other purposes, such as checking signal warrants, analyzing crash data, identifying impacts to bikes, peds, and transit, analyzing drive-through and gate queuing, addressing neighborhood traffic issues, and identifying infrastructure needs and timing caused by development. So with or without an LOS policy, and no matter what you call it, I don't see the traffic study going away. The basic process is that an application comes in, and then staff does a trip generation check, reviews the VMT screening criteria, and prepares a memo telling the applicant whether VMT or LTA analysis is needed. Then they go and hire a consultant to do one or both of those studies. VMT impacts and any mitigations are documented through the CEQA process, and then the LTA is a standalone document, and any recommended roadway improvements are included as conditions of approval on the project. The main thing that we're seeing is that a lot of residential projects that previously fell under our thresholds of analysis, which are 1,000 peak hour trip or 100 peak hour trips or 1,000 daily trips, are now being caught up in VMT. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our retail approach. And because of our county's high number of growth areas, we felt that the 50,000 square feet presumption of local serving was too low. And by adopting a higher threshold, our intent is not to give a pass to regional retail that increases VMT, but rather recognize that we have new subdivisions that are 5 to 7 miles away from the nearest grocery store. And we want to encourage community and neighborhood shopping centers to develop to hold those trips in closer. This is based on International Council of Shopping Centers, which classifies a neighborhood center as up to 125,000 square feet of gross floor area with a market area of 3 miles, which is pretty consistent with what we're seeing, which is a shopping center anchored by a full-service grocery store or drugstore with accompanying small tenants that provide convenience goods and personal services for the daily needs of the immediate neighborhood, and that's what we're screening out. We also include a provision to allow retail to use evidence that it's locally serving based on market analysis. So we recognize that travel demand models are only so sophisticated. We don't know if those 150 employees are a new Home Depot that will recapture existing trips or an entertainment complex that will have a regional draw. And this is especially important when it comes to specific plans, where of course the total retail in the plans can exceed this limit. The most important thing is right-sizing the amount of retail to the overall development. And in a few slides where I get into examples, I'm going to discuss a current example. So our significance thresholds are calculated using the regional travel demand model, SAC-SIM. It's an activity-based or tour model that requires a good deal of effort to run. And although it's always allowable to run the model, we have a checklist identifying when use of the model is required, and there's some examples on that list. We have developed a process to avoid running the model for small to medium projects. From the off-the-shelf model, we can not only calculate efficiency metrics within each TAZ, we can also get average lengths for home-based tours and commute tours. So we can start with an IT trip generation calculation, make adjustments as appropriate for internal trips, and then multiply by the average distance we have tabulated in that TAZ to get the project VMT. If it's a residential project, we can estimate the residents based on the average household size for that TAZ to get VMT per capita, or if it's an employment project, divide by the total number of employees to get VMT per employee. So the idea of mitigating VMT isn't completely foreign to us. For larger projects, we've long required trip-reducing programs for air quality and GHG purposes. Some example services we have funded are listed there. The way we've paid for these services is to condition development to form an active benefit zone within what we call County Service Area number 10. So forming a benefit zone requires an engineer's report to document the boundary, description of services provided, method of apportioning costs, a budget, and a charge roll of parcels. Once the property owners vote in favor of establishing or joining a benefit zone, a property tax assessment is collected every year and used to fund these ongoing services. Our intent is to continue to use this mechanism for larger projects. The issue with smaller projects is that it's often not financially feasible to provide TDM services that fully mitigate VMT impacts. We had explored the possibility of using this mechanism for off-site mitigation, but found that this was not legally allowed. The services funded by a benefit zone must directly benefit the property being assessed. We're currently exploring programmatic approaches such as impact fee programs and mitigation banks. So far, we've had several single-family residential projects come in that are above our screening threshold of 20 units, but below the 3,500 daily trip threshold requiring modeling. The typical approach we've used is to have a consultant prepare a VMT memo based on off-the-shelf model runs, which is cheaper and quicker than doing traditional traffic impact analysis. But unfortunately, when these projects come back with a significant impact, as most of them have, there's not much that can be done in terms of mitigation. Most of the CAPCOA measures are more applicable to employment projects than suburban residential development. These projects are either going to have to do an EIR or wait for the county to develop a programmatic mitigation approach. Another project I recently looked at was an assisted living memory care facility with an attached performing arts center. So according to our guidelines, convalescent care is considered to be a locally serving use like daycare or public school, so that component would screen out. The performing arts center is flagged as having a potential regional draw. We talked with the applicant to understand the proposed operations and found out that the center would primarily be used for residents and their visitors who would walk and not drive. They'd also share use of the facility with a neighboring school, which planned to relocate existing activities into the new building. So in the end, we found enough evidence to conclude that all uses we're locally serving would not increase VMT. I think the key thing is that the guidelines are not rigid and should be applied with common sense. It's important to ask questions and understand the full story, as some things that may initially appear regional may be local and vice versa. We're also working on several specific plans, and as recommended by OPR, we're analyzing each aspect of the plan separately. Residential and office components are subject to the respective efficiency metric, and retail will be analyzed for any VMT increase if not found to be locally serving. For this project, we had the benefit of the applicant having prepared an urban decay analysis to analyze the effect of the project's retail in the market area. So the idea is that you don't want the project to draw enough trips away from existing retail so as to cause blight. The analysis looked at a market area with a 6-mile radius around the project and found that the project's retail space of about 30 square feet per resident was in line with the surrounding area. The existing market was found to be in equilibrium today with positive fundamentals, vacancy and lease rates in the appropriate range. The analysis found there was the ability to sustain new retail growth commensurate with the new household growth. The analysis looked at leakage and found that 94% of the net new sales would be from growth in the market area. Lastly, the project definition specifically defined the types of uses permitted in neighborhood retail and community retail, and none were found to be regional. So we were able to conclude that the retail component of the project would not have a significant VMT impact. A pretty unique project that we're currently working on is a master plan update for the Sacramento International Airport. SMS is expanding the number of gates as well as developing a new cargo facility. As a regional public facility, it is subject to the 0 VMT increase threshold. As part of a separate effort, the airport commissioned a catchment area analysis to study existing and projected leakage. We're less than 100 miles away from Oakland, SFO, and SJC, and those Bay Area airports already serve a lot of our international demand. So what the analysis found was that as the Sacramento region continues to grow in population, we will leak more and more domestic trips to those Bay Area airports if additional service is not added at SMF. So from that baseline condition, we're looking at quantifying the VMT reductions achieved by the project's added service and gates, recapturing those passengers who would otherwise leak. it's likely the project will result in a net VMT decrease because, as OPR advises, analysis should not truncate trips at a model gateway or jurisdictional boundary. So in conclusion, we're finding that SB743 may streamline projects in a more urban context where there's high quality transit, higher density, and more mixed use projects. But in more suburban locations like ours, and especially where jurisdictions wish to maintain LOS standards, it is added complexity and cost. Small residential projects that previously flew under the LOS radar are now getting flagged for VMT impacts, which are difficult to impossible to mitigate absent a programmatic approach. I would not assess these results as a flaw, but rather observe that this appears to be what was intended by the legislation to move away from development patterns that we're accustomed to seeing. As transportation engineers, we're used to working with counts, capacity calculations, and delay estimates. Moving to VMT requires some different considerations and different data sources, such as market studies, urban decay, or even big data platforms, which are additional tools to assess VMT and may prove even more informative than travel demand models in some cases. Unusual projects or nuanced characteristics of common project types require case-by-case review and application of engineering judgment. And that's all I have.
Okay, Cameron, we do have one question that's come in that I saw, and that is that you are, through this process of change to SB 743, you've apparently changed the study area for the LOS-based traffic analysis. Can you tell us how you determine it now, and how is it different than what you used to do before SB 743?
Sure. So I think before, a lot of our concern was capturing a large enough study area such that we can say that we've disclosed all potential impacts of a project. And that often ran into neighboring jurisdictions and got pretty far away from the project, just because we wanted to make sure we could capture all the project trips until they got below our thresholds. In this case, we're not necessarily worried about getting challenged on not disclosing level of service impacts. We're more concerned about the immediate vicinity of the project and whether the project's going to cause any kind of queue spillbacks or safety concerns. If adding a double left turn lane will reduce queuing, that's something we'd potentially look into. We're not trying to completely hang our hat on LOS, as we realize that there is an inherent conflict between LOS and VMT. And if getting a good level of service means that there's impacts to PEDs or transit, that's something we're going to have to balance. But if adding a double left turn lane gets our delay down from an F to a D, that's something we're probably going to want to require. So I'd say right now we're more focused on just the vicinity of the project, not trying to chase impacts far away.
Okay, thanks. A couple more questions have come in. One relates to the, I don't know if it was senior housing, convalescent care, that type of project. And I think you said it was screened out as local serving. Can you talk a little bit more about what that project was and why it was considered local serving as opposed to maybe different kinds of housing that wouldn't be considered local serving?
Yeah, so what we're looking at in the local serving category is things that provide closer services to existing residents. So things like preschools, daycares. In this case, it's care of senior residents. And we have a table of different land uses in our zoning code. And we went through with our planning department and reviewed all those different uses and determined which ones are likely to shorten existing trips versus potentially generate new ones.
Okay, thanks. I think we have one other question that I want to address during your part of this. You mentioned some residential projects that weren't able to mitigate their impacts. And I'm going to take the question and add to it a little bit. Were they required to implement feasible travel demand management measures, and then what kinds TDM did they do, if any? And then lastly, what happened to them? Did they go on to an EIR? Did they abandon the project, or is there any resolution to where those projects ended up?
I don't have any updates on those yet. As I said, we recently adopted our thresholds a couple days ago. Before then, we were applying the guidelines on a case-by-case basis. So yeah, we'd certainly require all feasible mitigation measures. But the reality is a lot of our approaches for larger projects like the shuttle services and things like that are really hard to scale down to like a 40-unit subdivision. So, so a lot of those, we're not sure there's a lot of feasible measures they can do. So what were the other parts of the question?
Well, maybe you answered this, but are those, have any of those been resolved? Or are they still thinking about what to do? Like, for example, are they going to go on to do an EIR? Are they going to abandon the project, or where do they end up?
At this point, they're kind of stuck. They're either going to have to go on and do an EIR or wait for us to come up with some sort of program and maybe a way to mitigate their impact through funding off-site DMT reducing projects. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Cameron. I think it's time to move on. If you do have questions for Cameron in the audience, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end as we have time. And it's time to go on to our next presenter, and that is Maureen Gardner from the City of San Diego. So, Maureen, I'll turn the presentation over to you as soon as you're ready to start. And Maureen, you're on mute right at this moment. There you go.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I want to thank Randy for inviting me and ITE for holding this very timely series on SB743 implementation and the NorCal section for your help in putting this on. The City of San Diego, like many of you, I'm sure, have been working on SB743 for some time since it was adopted in 2013. And we've been participating with the ITE Transportation and Capacity Task Force, which has helped significantly in getting our program created. So today I'm going to highlight some of the components of our SB743 implementation and then discuss challenges and how we're addressing them. So here's just a little bit of information about the City of San Diego. We have about 1.4 million residents. We're the second largest city in California, 8th largest in the US. We have 540,000 jobs. And we're part of a binational metropolitan area of 6.5 million residents. Our land area is about 325 square miles, and we have 52 different community planning areas. So our planning department's been working on a complete communities initiative in order to implement our general plan, our climate action plan, and our housing element. And the policies and plans are implemented by our community plan updates, our zoning, and this community, complete communities initiative. So this initiative includes housing solutions, play everywhere, mobility choices, and infrastructure now. And of course, I don't have time to tell you about all of them. I'll include a link at the end of my presentation. But the point is that these all are working together. And I'll talk a little bit about our Mobility Choices program, because that is part of our SB743 implementation. And it includes amendments to our land development manual to address our CEQA thresholds for transportation, our new transportation study manual, new mobility choices regulations, and an active transportation in lieu fee, as well as a calculator to determine the fee. So just quickly, related to our thresholds, the city is going with 15% below the regional average for both residential and employment. For industrial uses, for residential and commercial office employment. For industrial, we're going with the regional average as our threshold. Additionally, small projects under 300 ADT would be presumed less than significant, and we have our locally serving retail is anything 100,000 square feet or less, as long as they can show by a market study that they are locally serving retail. And this just kind of shows you what our SANDAG 2016 VMT maps look like for the region. The green areas are the most efficient, going to the darker blue in the outskirts of the county, which are less efficient, kind of to be expected. The residential VMT is on the left and the employment VMT is on the right. So our land development manual amendments are, we updated our traffic impact study manual for VMT and for new local mobility analysis that really is focusing on safety and access with an emphasis on pedestrians, bicycles, and transit. And the mobility choices regulations basically will require some VMT reducing measures and amenities in certain projects that are in VMT efficient areas, and would require a VMT fee for projects that are in mobility zone 4, which are the less VMT efficient areas. So I want to talk about the challenges. If I can find my, okay, here we go. Sorry. Okay, so the challenges with SB743 implementation for us are related to this entire paradigm shift from level of service to VMT. We heard from our stakeholders that they wanted to understand it better. And we're addressing that challenge by holding additional outreach and briefings with stakeholders, as well as a webinar to try to educate the public on VMT and the Complete Communities program. So we're in this transitional period. We haven't been adopted, our new thresholds haven't been adopted by City Council, and the program, the Mobility Choices program that goes along with that. So we're in a transitional period where we're applying, thresholds that are consistent with the guidelines, but that is a challenge for us. So another challenge is related to the fact that some of our transit priority areas are not screened out, either the entire TPA or portions of TPAs are not shown to be VMT efficient today. So mobility choices would provide a mechanism to help those move forward. And we are also working on a citywide transit priority area programmatic EIR to cover off on these areas, because we still want to be encouraging development where we're planning our transit system. So another challenge is related to implementing transportation improvements in this new world. So we have been focusing on the end result of getting multimodal improvements needed to accommodate project traffic. And we're using consistency with the community plan mobility element and health and safety in order to get those improvements in place. And the draft transportation study manual has reduced study area requirements and reduced triggers for implementing vehicular improvements, as well as more information and guidance on implementing pedestrian and bicycle projects. Pedestrian and bicycle and transit improvements to accommodate project traffic. So another challenge are the non-standard and unique projects that we've been hearing about. The mitigation challenges with TDM measures that you've also heard about, the cost with that, the fact that they need to be monitored, and that we need more research on these. So related to that, TDM mitigation effectiveness calculations. We have sources that we can use, but they have ranges of data that are that have different effectiveness in different land use contexts. So we would like to get a VMT reduction calculator in place that's really sensitive to San Diego specific data. And another potential challenge really is, working with different agencies having different thresholds. More of this is just related to really coordinating with other agencies, which is a positive. For example, how do we now analyze freeways for impacts under SB 743 and from a planning context with our community plan updates? And other adjacent agencies that may not have the same VMT thresholds as the City of San Diego. In addition, related to modeling, we're so fortunate to have a very sophisticated activity-based model in our region and a fantastic modeling team at Sandag. And that's partnered with agencies to help create the VMT data that we need. And with all models, there are some limitations to that. So some of those include, like we've heard before, the VMT truncation at county boundaries. We're using the resident model VMT, so that means employees that may live outside of the region and work in the city of San Diego, that VMT may not be captured. So we're doing the extra work, or we have done the extra work to look at, is that a sensitivity analysis to see if we need to do some kind of post-processing or additional analysis to verify our VMT information. The fact that we're on the border is, so another thing with the VMT truncation at the county border is we have the statewide model that can help with other counties in San Diego, but when it comes to our boundary with Mexico, we have the cross-border model, which is also provides some information. But it's just an additional challenge in extracting VMT data the way that we're using it for SB743 analysis for traffic that's coming across the border and maybe working in the city of San Diego. And there may be parts of the city of San Diego that are more affected by that than others, and identifying those and then seeing what we can do to analyze those appropriately. In addition, if there are some areas that are developing and don't have much development today, the VMT data, we need to be careful at looking at those, because the whole idea with SB743 is you look at existing VMT characteristics, and if the future land uses are similar to the existing, you can kind of assume that the VMT is also going to be similar. So where you have completely transforming land uses, that may not be the case. Additionally, we currently aren't able to model land use changes with our current version of the model. So we've addressed that by working with our partners at Sandag and the ITE Transportation and Capacity Task Force to develop a workaround for that and a way to use the previous our ABM1 model in order to create relationships and apply those to ABM2. And then finally, you know, the model is updated every 4 years or so. And so we know that the VMT data that we're going to be using is going to be different. So that could be a potential challenge where there's the potential for somebody who's not significant in one version of the model with the 2016 data, for example, and then it to be different in the future because the information will be different. The model's constantly being updated, continually improved, and based on travel survey behavior data, and will be, I'm sure, increasingly able to address these challenges. So finally, you know, SB743 implementation challenges include balancing the interests and needs of stakeholders while furthering the city's climate and equity goals. And so our relationship status with VMT is that it's complicated. And we're up to the challenge, I would say. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. I did see one question that was specific to you, and then we've got a few questions that could go to any of the panelists. The one that I saw that was specific to you is, are your thresholds specific to the city, or were they developed, or are they regional thresholds in nature?
We have, the city of San Diego has our own specific thresholds. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And let's see if I get any other questions for Maureen. Questions are kind of jumping around on me, so let's see. Oh, I'll go to this one next. Just I'm not sure if it's quite the right order, but oh, wait a minute. I'm going to skip that one for now. Okay, All right, I'm not seeing any specific to you, so I've got some general questions that could be answered by any of the panelists. So I'll kind of pick different folks to start, and then the others can chime in. I'll start with Maureen, actually. I think this question was asking if you have a project that has both a development and a transportation component. Say you're building some land use, but you're also building a roadway. Do your guidelines handle that specific situation? And then I could go to the other panelists also on that one.
Yes, thank you for the question, because I meant to cover that in my presentation. So one of the other screening criteria the city included in our thresholds was if you are a mobility element, circulation element roadway that was included in a community plan update that took place after 2008, so after our general plan was updated, then you are presumed to be less than significant. So we don't feel that we can take those transportation projects out of the context of the land use growth that they were included in order to support. And so that is why we felt comfortable doing that. Now we used 2008 as the, that's when our general plan was updated. We've done several community plan updates since then, and have been having very much a multimodal focus for those. And so that's why we chose that criteria.
Okay, Christine, do you have something specific for projects that are both development and transportation?
I think no, our guideline really cover you know, the land use development and transportation separately.
Okay, and Cameron, I'll go to Cameron first. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, so we, for our development projects, the smaller roadways that are like 2-lane roadways primarily intended to provide access to new development and provide local circulation and mobility, we're considering those to be kind of local serving and not looking at those. But if a development is proposing to widen any roadways, we would look at the VMT increase associated with that.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Let's see. We have about 7 minutes left in the scheduled portion, and we can stay on if there's interest, as Ravi mentioned. But I have a few more questions, and so I'm going to go through and ask some questions of the various panelists. And let's see here. There's a question about a VMT fee versus VMT bank. Christine, I'm going to pick on you, but I think any of the panelists can ask this. Have you looked into VMT fees versus VMT banks, and can you are you able to quickly talk about the difference between them?
You know, I think VMPeers and UC Berkeley, they published a couple of publications on the VMT, actually it's VMT bank and VMT exchange. Not sure about the VMT fee. I thought, you know, the VMT mitigation bank kind of works as, you know, a way to really collect fees to by a regional or by a city agencies to implement projects that are already being planned, those VMT reduction projects. So both programs have that fee in there. In terms of VMT exchange, I think probably there's not that fee involved. It's really an exchange. For example, a big development project needs to mitigate a certain amount of VMT, then there's already a list of projects that the developer can pick from. So that's an exchange. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I'm going to go back to a question that Cameron talked about, or Cameron answered, but there's been a request for Maureen and Christine to answer this question. It's the question of when a project a small project is not able to mitigate its VMT, and it would then have a significant VMT impact and would need to do an EIR to be processed under CEQA. Maureen, I'll start with you. Have you had cases where people have come to the city? Have you heard about cases where a small project has in that situation and then is complaining that they can't afford to do an EIR, or any complaints of that nature?
I cannot speak to that. So a small project in the city of San Diego is less than 300 ADT. So there might be more wiggle room there than there are with other thresholds for that. But I'm just not part of the development review process on day to day, so I can't tell you. But at this point in time, without the Mobility Choices program and sort of a path forward, a programmatic path forward for them, if you cannot mitigate your VMT impacts, you would need to proceed with an EIR if you don't screen out or mitigate.
Okay, thanks. Christine, have you come across that issue? I know you're the regional agency, so that might be a kind of an indirect question for you, but have you heard of that question come up in Fresno County?
I haven't really. I think a lot of our cities are still in the process of really adopting their threshold and looking at this different kinds of exemptions for projects at what level. So they're at that process. I really haven't heard that anything from the project sponsors directly yet. And I mean, we have got a request to calculate project VMT for different projects. There are a lot of them. They are in the in the pipeline, but we really don't follow up with those requests, at the city level. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Question for Maureen. Not sure if I totally understand this question, but kind of interested in the general topic. If adjacent agencies do a VMT analysis, or you do a VMT analysis on the border of an adjacent agency, do you have you commented on other agencies' VMT analysis, or has anybody commented on yours yet? Has that happened?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I feel that we have seen some VMT analysis prior to July 1st. So I don't know if that's happened since July 1st and what the comments have been like. Again, that might be through our development services department. So I can't say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I will take that opportunity to jump in a little bit here, and we're getting awfully close to the we're getting close to the 1 o'clock threshold here. So I want to present a couple closing slides, and then we will let the Q&A session continue on for an extra 15 minutes or so, depending on the level of interest. And seems like there are a couple other unanswered questions and some follow-through interest here. So I'll share my screen quickly. So just the contact information for the three panelists and the moderators, moderator for today's session. If anybody is interested, feel free to reach out to the panelists for any follow-through questions. Of course, this session today is being recorded, and this session, as well as the previous session, a video recording of that through YouTube link or something would be forwarded to the attendees who registered for this event. But the actual presentation itself, if you need copies of it or if you need information from it, please reach out to the specific panelists who presented today. And that, last but not the least, I do want to remind the attendees here today, there's the next session coming up on October 29th. It would focus on Caltrans perspectives on the rollout of their transportation analysis framework, and there's the impact analysis guidelines under CEQA. So with that, I also want to take this opportunity to thank our hosts and coordinators between Western ITE and ITE NorCal and ITE sections throughout California. and for our Q&A box monitor here today was Cameron Chu Chris Gregerson from ITU NorCal. So with that, I will open it back to Q&A. And then.
So, Bobby, we're in the portion of the webinar now where if anyone needs to leave, we understand it's 1 o'clock, a little after 1 o'clock, but we're going to stay for a few minutes and chat. So I did see one question that wasn't answered. This is a little bit off the topic of SB743 and VMT, but it's relevant because we use activity-based models for VMT analysis. I think I'm going to direct this question to you, Christine. And I don't know if this is even possible. The question says, please provide a quick explanation of the activity-based model. So I don't know if you have a 1 minute or 2 minute or 3 minute explanation of what that is.
It's basically a tool-based model, as Cam mentioned. It's behavior-based instead of compared to the old 4-step model, which was trip-based. It's much more sensitive to a lot of smart growth policies such as bike and ped and transit project. So basically, this is a much more superior model that compared to the 4-step model. MPOs have been using, traffic models to estimate trips, VMT and GHG, and ABM model is just more sensitive, and it's a finer grain level. It used to be a task to traffic analysis zone based. Now it could be parcel based now with the ABM. So and then it really tracks individual travel pattern instead of it used to be the 4-step model. It's traffic analysis zones, really household people in that traffic house task does not have the individual characteristics. But with ABM, everybody actually their characteristic, their age, their gender, their income, how many cars they have, when do they travel, whether they're taking kids to school, all these characteristics are tracked by the ABM. So it's a much more sensitive and more superior model to estimate trips and VMT. Very short and brief. I don't know.
Wow.
Answer the question.
Thank you. That was great. Great.
It also sort of complicates how you measure VMT, because now you're modeling someone going from home to drop off kids at school to work to Starbucks back to work.
Right.
But if you're looking at the VMT per capita, are you looking at just their home-based trips? Are you looking at the trips made by that resident throughout the entire day and rolling that back to the household? Same thing on the employment side. Are you going to count the work to lunch to back, or are you just going to count the commute portion of the tour?
Yeah, and with ABM, we can track all that. Whether it's you're on your way to work, you drop your kids off. On your way back from work to home, you make a trip to the grocery store, or during lunchtime, you make a trip from the workplace to a restaurant. But with the 4-step model, we lost a lot of these details. There's called non-home based trips in the 4-step model. We basically don't know where the origin destination are for those non-home based trips. That's why there's a lot of guesstimations for the 4-step model, which is kind of not very good for VMT estimation purpose.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to a question. Let's see. It has to do with quantitative versus qualitative analysis. I'm going to start with Cameron and then go to Maureen, and then Christine, you can add to this if you want. But it says, without a calculator that validates a decrease in VMT mitigation measures, how does your EIR document or determine a less than significant transportation impact qualitatively or quantitatively? So you can answer that part of the question, or I'll rephrase it a little bit to say, starting with Cameron, do your guidelines allow a qualitative VMT analysis?
Yes, and we have used both. For the airport project I referenced earlier, which Chris and Kimberly Horn is working on for us, they are using the model to quantify a lot of the trips that within the SACOG region, but then once you go outside of our model area, you have to do some post-model calculations to get your VMT going to the Bay Area airports. So there's some stuff that has to be done off-model. We use the model to the extent that we can, but there are some instances where off-model or qualitative analysis is appropriate.
Okay, Maureen, anything you want to add on qualitative analysis?
Just that I think we would use a quantitative analysis wherever that's possible, and where we needed to use qualitative to support that. And although we don't have a VMT calculator that's sort of integrated with like a map or a web-based VMT calculator, we can use the you know, the factors of mitigation effectiveness and use those to calculate it, you know, potential reductions. And so that would still be quantitative. It's just a matter of working out what are the appropriate reductions to be taking.
Okay, Christine, anything to add to that?
Not really, you know, we try to really, as I mentioned, we developed a VMT tool for smaller projects so people can download the spreadsheet tool, and it really takes a couple of minutes to spit out the VMT for smaller project. For a bigger project, we recommend using our ABM model. And for qualitative analysis, I know, I'm just thinking aloud. Potential use for that is, you know, if we're looking at the induced demand for the new land uses caused by the transportation capacity project, then I could see a panel of land use experts talking about what would that induced land use be like. And, you know, that could be something that's, I see, qualitative.
Okay, thank you. This next question, questions are coming in, so I'm going to keep reading them off. And I'm going to direct this to Christine. It's about small cities, and you have small cities in your region. The question is, how are small cities incorporating a regional model into their local TIA guidelines? And if not, what types of TIA guidelines are small cities adopting to comply with the SB743 requirements? And I might add to that myself is whether your small cities feel the need to do their own TIA guidelines in addition to yours that Fresno COG has done.
You know, we have actually, you know, we have done some survey pre-743, and all small cities really, a lot of them did not have their own TIAs. The bigger agencies, they do. They have pretty comprehensive TIAs. So I think, you know, according to my conversation with the small agencies, small cities, they're probably just going to point to the regional guideline for certain components, using of our tool, using our recommended thresholds and methodology. So that's probably what they're going to do, just point to the regional guideline. Okay,
I'm going to try to guess at the essence of this question a little bit different way. Is there anything different at least in your region that the small cities are doing with respect to the model and how they use the model versus a larger city?
I don't really think so, except I think for the smaller cities, maybe a lot of their projects are smaller. Besides, given that our small cities, their population range from 5,000 to 30,000. So they probably will not see a lot of projects that will need us to run the ABM. They can probably just use that VMT calculation tool on our website, or because there's project sizes so small, they can just screen out. That's my guess.
Okay, I'm seeing one more question that we haven't addressed, and others keep coming in. This is for Cameron. If I understood correctly, you mentioned that small projects with higher VMT have to go through the EIR process, I'm assuming if they aren't able to mitigate their the VMT or wait for a VMT bank program, do you have a process in place for projects to wait for the VMT bank program along with the entitlement process? And I'm gonna add my old flavor of this to say, if hypothetically, if a small project came in and said, hey, we have a VMT bank identified, we want to mitigate through that, would you allow them to do it?
Yeah, if there's a feasible mitigation measure they can implement that shows us that they can reduce VMT and eliminate their impact, that would allow them to move forward. So if they were able to somehow quantify that they were so many VMT above the threshold and that putting in a bike lane would get them below, that would be a path forward. But I think a lot of the projects we're seeing are just high enough above the threshold where it's not likely they're going to be able to find something that they can afford to implement and reduce their impact below the threshold. So those are the projects that are kind of stuck. So, you know, they're going to either have to wait for the whether it's a fee program or a mitigation bank or something else, or otherwise, I guess, implement mitigation to the extent feasible, still have a significant unavoidable impact, and have to bring that to the board.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of my own questions. I think we might have time for one of them. I'm going to go to Maureen and ask about, you said that if I understood correctly, the SB743 conversion process, adoption process has not been adopted by the City Council, so you're in a little bit of limbo. I think many agencies around the state aren't planning to formally adopt their own guidelines, but you're in the situation where you are. So what kind of challenges are you experiencing in this, you know, kind of limbo period where you have, you know, kind of draft guidelines that haven't been adopted?
Thank you for the question. So agencies don't have to adopt thresholds to be consistent with 743. They can just apply them. But in the city of San Diego, we have CEQA thresholds adopted by our council. So in order to implement SB 743, we need to update them to revise them for consistency. But it's not stopping us from implementing those thresholds on a project by project basis to be consistent with state law.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is that you're on a case-by-case basis, you're overriding your own rules that the council previously adopted for level of service. And you're doing it for a very good reason, but you're still overriding your own rules.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we have time for one more. This is for Cameron. You talked about a mixed-use project where a specific plan, I think it was, where you had different uses, and you analyzed the uses separately. Are you taking credit for the internal VMT or the internal capture of trips and somehow reducing the VMT for one or more of the individual uses when you do those?
If I understand the question correctly, I don't think so. So if we have like a resident of the project that works in an office in the project, that VMT would be counted for both the residential VMT per capita calculation and the VMT per employment office calculation. For these specific plan areas, we're modeling them all in the travel demand model and just reporting metrics from that. So internal trips would get counted in each category.
Okay, all right, thanks. Robbie, I'm going to go to you. It's 1:14. Is it time to wrap up our webinar here?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think we do not have any unanswered pipeline of questions at this point. If they are, I'm sure they can be routed to the panelists directly. So with that, I will thank you all for being here today, and we'll look forward to our session 3 coming up later part of this month, October 29th, I believe, Thursday. And if it's okay with everybody, have a good rest of the day and rest of your week. And that concludes our today's session. Thank you all again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.